lately I'm thinking much more about relations between the artist and other artists, or the artists and the wider world. That this is a big transition moment, that the focus that developed for me in 1993 continues to be a real passion, and that's the convergence of bodies and whatever sort of technological system I could get a hold of. And a system in this sense can be something as simple as a tiny camera plugged into a computer. I'm thinking back to 1994. Or it can be in different years, a full-on motion capture Vicon system. So the passion is working across bodies and different systems and just seeing what comes out of it in terms of understanding the body, in terms of understanding movement, in terms of artwork, in terms of ideas and thoughts. So where I am right now, after many, many years of working this way and of producing a book that was quite a turning point for me, or a consolidation point. Right now I'm looking both inward and outward at the same time. Inward in the sense of returning to increasingly somatic practices and yoga. Outward in the sense of understanding choreography much more as social choreographies. What I'm interested in adding into the mix is our use of mobile devices. So in some respects it's becoming much more a study of ubiquitous technologies that are absolutely everywhere, but also technologies that we befriend in a very simple way, and how we use that, how it changes our perception, how it changes the extension of our limbs, and how we relate to people differently. My methodology, phenomenology, and it's become a way for me to live in the world, is a way that I make sense of almost every moment of my life. It's just a way of receiving information from the world through my senses and integrating that with where I am as a person in terms of corporeality, but also imagination and memory and whatever thoughts or ideas happen to be filtering through myself at the moment. Phenomenology is a philosophical tradition that emerged in the 20th century and was an attempt to return to description. And I think that dancers and actors and artists of all sorts are we are very embodied, and in some ways what we're doing is we're describing the world as we experience it. I have a tremendous respect for what dancers and performers and choreographers will say, and I think that we often weren't given the space to talk. So what I love now, and why phenomenology is so incredibly rich to me, is that it gives us permission to speak. I think this is what dancers needed in a way. It was just the space to be able to say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking, and it comes through my body. And some of what comes out of this permission to speak may be very personal and very journalistic and very poetic, but some of it actually may give us the grounds to challenge or extend accepted methodologies, philosophies of thought, notions that can come from a wide range of more conventional academic disciplines now. When I finished the PhD in a philosophy department where I taught dance classes and did a bit of performing in order to pay for I was a dancer who paid for my way through philosophy, in part through performing. And I would leave a studio and have this really strong recollection of taking off the dance clothes, wet, whatever, smelly, putting them in a bag and going into a philosophy seminar and making sure that they were in the bottom of the of the bag. So it almost felt like there was this double life going on. But the first sense of can't not do it was that I was going to write the philosophy on French feminism, a passion for luce regare and notions of corporeality that came through this incredibly rich body of women philosophical writing in the 60s and 70s. And suddenly I realized one day while I was moving, I think I was on a bike, I wasn't dancing, that the PhD had to be about dance, it had to be about movement, and that it's like the two lives that were forced apart insisted on becoming converged. So I had to talk to my supervisor, who I saw yesterday, funnily enough.
Oh, wow.
Simon Critchley, he's at the New School in the philosophy department. Great. And I had to say, it's got to change, it's got to be about phenomenology of dance, and they said okay. And then the next point of can't not doing it was after the PhD, got through the Viva, didn't know what I was going to do, next, decided that I would leave the philosophy behind, that I wasn't going to try and pursue a career as a philosopher or as a philosophy professor. Suddenly found myself performing in a media context. It was Paul Sermon's Telematic Dreaming, the installation that started it all, the installation that launched 1,000 pieces of thought and movement. And maybe this is my feminist self too. I found that a lot of the rhetoric at that time it just didn't make sense to me. It was disembodied and a bit militaristic and a bit whatever it was. It just didn't work for me. So what I was experiencing in this installation was not what I was hearing in the outside world, and I got a bit, I wanted to push back and dig my heels in, and I realized that my way of understanding was phenomenology. So it's almost as if I had to open that toolbox again and pull it out and give myself the space to reflect upon and write about what for me was really happening. I described, and that's where I totally understood the need to describe the movement through the pen in the notebook. And then I looked at what I would write, and then I looked at what people would say, and sometimes I would see convergences or hints of corporeality or intimacy or affect. In those days they were really just traces. And I would try to reconcile them. A lot of where I am now is thanks to the trajectory of previous years, the people I've worked with, the people I've taught, and the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University, where I taught with Tekla Shapours and Steve DiPaolo and Ron Wakari, and a really fascinating group of people who worked across computer graphics, sophisticated networked art, performance, visual art, and design, and of course all the technologies that permeate this. So I started to think more in a context of making things that would have a wider application. And it's not that art doesn't, because I think fundamentally art and performance has an extraordinary wide application. But what happened is, because I was there, I had to start thinking a little bit more through a design lens, through a ubiquitous lens, and I had to start understanding, well, is choreography design? If we're actually building interactive systems, is that the same thing as a participatory performance installation, or is it more of a performative ubiquity? So a lot of convergences started to happen, and a lot of playing with how we describe things. And the thing I wanted to say, picking up the thread again about embodied cognition, is that it's not just about looking at a single person or a single body brain unit, because originally it was just looking at the brain, and then the great breakthrough, which a lot of us knew and lived with already, is that the brain is in the body, and the body is integrated totally with the brain. You can't actually separate them. That was a great drawing together. But I think the further step that not everyone is taking is the recognition that we're embodied through other bodies.
The distributed cognition.
But also the notion of intersubjectivity and intercorporeality. You cannot construe an embodied being separate from other embodied beings. And this is hugely important, because we're in the world, and we understand the world through other people and how they understand us. And there's this constant reversible relation with all of this. Merleau-Ponty is a philosopher who's stayed with me for many, many years, and he's got a very strong reliance on the notion of the chiasm, which is like the figure of eight, where the fact that we see folds in on the fact that we are seen, the fact that we dance folds in on the fact that something dances through us, and it's loopy. I like what's happening with the battery the battery keeps going out, and we keep having to pick up threads, because one of the things I've always felt is that the glitches in technology throw you into a different creative place. It destabilizes you, and you have to. It's improvisation. Like, has a like a Hitchcockian cameo. Walks through and walks off.